Today we are doing another progression in our series about what if the U.S. Army had adopted the lever action rifle in the end of the Old West days, so the 1870s, 1880s.
We did a video a long time ago proposing this question,
Yeah.
and it turned into a series. We've talked about the 1866, the 1860 Henry. We've talked about the idea that, obviously ammunition resupply is always a concern. We've left that off the table, and we realize that's a big what if.
Right.
But what we're talking about here is the capability on the battlefield. What would have happened if they'd had these repeaters in the face of the adversity that they found themselves in?
So let's first just touch back on what they actually did use, because the U.S. cavalry, so we had the Army, the infantry, and the cavalry, and of course the cavalry kind of gets most of the notoriety and most of the combat action in, between the Civil War, the end of the Civil War, and say the Spanish-American War.
The Indian Wars.
Exactly. That's not infantry so much. That's cavalry trying to hunt down Indian tribes. And they actually started with the Spencer. And then after a few years, they decided that was kind of crap, and they went to a single-shot trapdoor Springfield carbine.
And if you haven't seen the video where we compare the trapdoor to the Spencer, it actually becomes pretty evident why that was the case. It seemed like they made the right call.
They actually did.
Yes.
Now, it took the U.S. a very long time to get away from single-shot trapdoor rifles. They would eventually adopt the Krag-Jorgensen for a very short period of time before ultimately adopting the bolt-action Mauser in the form of the 1903 Springfield. So, and for good, there are some compelling reasons to stick with a reduced amount of firepower for cavalry in the field. You touched on it already. Ammo resupply. Like, okay, you're 2 weeks out on the trail from the last fort where you had supplies, and you're tracking a group of Indian warriors, and you've used up your ammo. You're kind of screwed, because it's 2 weeks back to the fort to get more ammo, and if you get attacked in that time, you're just up shit creek.
And we know how big a deal that was because, for example, there's a lot of records of them getting 1 round of training ammunition. If that, for them to aim with, ensure their gun's zeroed and what they're doing. So we're also dealing with poorly trained soldiers as well.
Poorly financed army. They didn't have a lot of money. Part of the reason Gatling guns really never got used is they didn't want to allocate the money to buy ammunition to train with the Gatling, or even to use the Gatling.
However, there were a number of instances in which combat showed itself to be the case in which the repeating rifle, if there was ammunition available, which, by the way, the opposition took that to heart, as well as civilians that armed themselves well versus the military, there was proof that the 1860 Henry and other repeating rifles, lever guns, were an overwhelming force multiplier. And we have a video on the channel about that in which there was instances in which
well, you could call the Little Bighorn one complete instance of this.
The Battle of the Greasy Grass, in which it turns out that the Indian forces, or indigenous people, had a very large volume of repeating rifles, Henrys and 1866s and even 73s.
Something like a third of the Indian forces there were using repeaters.
Compared to what they were facing against, which were single shots, that's a big deal. But there's also battles that we have also on this channel. I called it the first assault rifle about the Henry. You should watch that as well, because there's other ones I profiled in which the Henry, which this ultimately is a progenitor of, proved itself to be a big deal.
Yeah. So what we're looking at today is, what if we consider a well-trained element of the U.S. military? Let's say they're willing to put in, Congress appropriates more money, they're willing to put in the money for proper good arms, good ammunition, a training budget. What could these guys actually have been capable of on the battlefield if we divorce this from some of the logistical issues?
Or even, let's say, a cavalry division that was specialist.
Yeah.
Like special forces, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And the rifle that we ended up looking at very closely and lovingly is the Winchester 1876. This is effectively the outgrowth of the Henry. So the Henry became the 1866, where they added a front handguard and a loading gate.
Kingsgate loaded padding.
Yep. The 66 then became the 1873, where they got away from rimfire ammunition. They added a dust cover on the top of the action to help seal it up.
They added a safety to make sure you don't have an out-of-battery detonation. They increased the strength of the receiver. It's no longer gunmetal. It is actually steel.
Yep.
Yep.
And then the 1876 is the final outgrowth of that system, where now they scale it up to the full-length rifle cartridges. The 60, 66, and 73 were all pistol cartridges. 73 introduced the 4440. In this, we're talking about real rifle cartridges.
This originally came out in 4570. It was around for a little while, and then they eventually went to the 4560 cartridge, which is the one I think we would want to standardize on.
Yes. As with most of the Winchesters, they were offered in several different calibers.
Excuse me, 4575. 4570 was the standard government cartridge, but this came out in something called 4570, but it became 4560, which is what we're dealing with today.
So what is 45-60?
I would say that we could argue, we've heard arguments for, I was making the argument that the pistol caliber cartridge was probably sufficient in general for what it needs. However, we're dealing with a cartridge now that's a 300 grain bullet at around 1,300 feet per second.
That's not bad.
That's not impotent by any stretch of the imagination, and when you compare it to the government loads of 45-55, which was the carbine load, 405 grain bullet at around 1,100, or the 45-70 full power cartridge load with a 405 grain bullet at around 1,400 feet per second, you're pretty smack in the middle between the two.
Really are, but the lighter bullet really does translate into less recoil.
Yep, it does. And with this gun, the 1876, it is not a single shot. This particular one now, magazine, spring, tension, and stuff can play to this. But this gun, for example, loads to 11+1.
That's a shitload of ammo.
Yep, compared to a single shot, you have an incredible ability to not only continuously fire, but you also have something that you have with a semi-automatic that you would never have with a single shot, which is the ability to put another round on target if you were to miss.
Right.
That's the big deal a semi-auto brings, and that's the big deal a repeater brings, especially in the world of single shots, which is bang, oops, got it.
Right.
And that's a huge difference. At the Battle of K.H. Butte, near the Galliera Mountains, I have a video on the channel about that. Both the indigenous forces and the cavalry exchanged gunfire for an entire 24 hours and got essentially no hits.
On either side.
Yep.
Yeah. And why?
Because they were shooting at wide angles, but the marksmanship wasn't there either. And the ability to shoot at a fleeting moving target is an entirely different problem with a single shot than it is with a repeater.
Right. So you take a group of guys on horseback, giving them the magnified firepower of a repeating rifle like this, really is a force multiplier. It allows a small group of soldiers to have the impact of, I think you could reasonably argue, 10 times as many with single-shot rifles.
Mm-hmm. So a smaller force suddenly presents itself as a stronger opposition on the battlefield.
Right.
Yep. So with that said, let's go ahead and go through some of the feeding and handling and firing of this gun and explain why we think this is would have been the right answer should there have been that sort of forward thinking. All right, let's talk about the manual of arms of the 1873 or the 1876 for that matter, or pretty much any of these lever guns. One, there's a dust cover. We're going to go ahead and chamber load on this so we could get the full capacity of 12+1 or 11+1 for 12, but we don't have enough ammunition today, so we're going to load just to 10, but I'm going to go ahead and show that. So you open the dust cover, and all you do is delicately open the bolt without actually raising the lifter. Take a round, slide it in, and just close the bolt. At that point, carefully, bring the hammer to safety cock, like that. The rest of the ammunition will go through the magazine. King's Gate, you just simply slide them in all the way. 2, 3.
Mention, if you don't push it quite all the way, the gate actually stays
4.
locked open.
Yes, that's true. 5. 6.
And you can top this up at any time,
7.
as long as the bolt's closed.
8. And the last round, that gives us 10 in this gun at this point. Make sure the King's Gate is all the way in. King's Gate will open up like that. And at that point, all we do is bring the hammer back and fire the gun. As you can see, if that had been a single shot, I think that if there was a guy with a single shot downrange, that would have been overwhelming firepower, even with my one miss. The toggle link action of this system is very fast, very easy to repeat, and getting repeat shots on target is simple with this gun, which would have changed the course of many battles on the battlefield, regardless of which side you were on.
All right, I want to get a chance in at this. This looks like really seriously cool shooting. That cavalry gun you load on Sunday and shoot all week long, right? Typically, of course, you'd probably do this from a cartridge belt, not a cargo pocket. I don't believe the cargo pocket was military technology of the 1880s. Still more. Not done yet. That's number 9. And number 10. All right. that is, I mean, you expect the 4570 to be an absolutely just beastly, uncontrollable cartridge, tons of recoil, and the 4560 entirely changes that. Now, part of that is the weight of the gun, I think. It's a long barrel, which is there in order to get a long magazine tube, so you get the full capacity of it. And that full octagon barrel's fairly heavy, but man, does it tame the recoil. This thing is just really nice to shoot. Dang.
All right, so for those of you that are really worried about black powder fouling, the reality is this was thought through on this gun, and there's actually a little butt plate cleaning kit that you just slide the little door open and then kind of, excuse me as I turn it here, pull out your segmented cleaning rod right there, and an easy way to clean your gun. Now with black powder, you only need to clean with hot water and a little bit of oil, and that's all you got to do. So in the field, that was something that was viable. When you're done, you just put it in there, close that door, and you're good to go. So that black powder fouling thing, you absolutely can get through multiple magazines of this ammunition without an issue. I can guarantee you that. And then when you have a break in the battle, just take out your cleaning kit and clean it. So that wouldn't have been as big of a field condition problem as some people might have thought. All right, so what do you think?
This thing is awesome.
It's fantastic.
This is my first time really actually shooting this. I've seen what it is on paper.
Yes.
But wow, it's a whole nother thing in person.
The recoil is quite minimal.
Yeah.
These are loaded to the full velocity load. These are 300 grain bullets at that 1,350 feet per second. People in the audience are going to know, you didn't use black powder, you didn't use black powder. And there's truth to that. And the reason for that is quite honestly, it's a giant pain to load black powder cartridges. However, I can tell you, I've shot extensively in cowboy action shooting, and the 1873/76 action with the right powder charge of black powder does obfuscate and close the bore, and you do not get fouling that causes this gun to fail. All it means is you have to clean the barrel.
Right.
But so we're getting the same recoil, the same velocities, the same everything else besides that problem.
You know, I think a lot of the reason this isn't better known is that 4560 cartridge, you can't buy it. Nobody makes that.
No, the parent cartridge is 4570, and there's actually is a video on the channel, or was, because of YouTube policies, I'm not sure, of me cutting down 4570 into 4560. It's really just a shorter 4570 case, but you have to cut it, trim it, and chamfer it.
Yeah.
And those are hard to acquire, and that made it an oddball cartridge. And the world back then, kind of like the world today, is that in 308 or 556? And the guy's like, nope, and you're like, I don't want it. And that's kind of how it worked back then, because it's some oddball cartridge.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that this wasn't the intermediate cartridge that brought 300 grains at 1,350 feet per second to the battlefield or to anywhere else.
I don't want to get hit by that.
No, who would? These were used quite a bit by hunters, big game hunters. These were not excluded from that realm, but in terms of military application, they never really saw it. Well, they saw no military application, and they weren't seen as a combat rifle, which is interesting.
Yeah, well, the Army, we already talked about a variety of reasons the Army had. I mean, shoot, the Army wouldn't have been comfortable just with guys having these things without any easy way to unload them without cycling rounds to the chamber. That would scare the crap out of a drill sergeant.
Yeah, we're dealing with an era in which when they were slowly transitioning to repeaters, they actually at some point tried to put artificial hammers on guns to determine whether the gun was cocked or not, even though the hammer didn't have any play in the function of the gun.
Yeah.
So that is a real thing, and if you're the guy walking down that training line and you don't know what's the condition of that rifle, and Sergeant Snuffy's there with that thing, and you've got 12 rounds in this thing, and he's going this, and rounds are ejecting out, and anytime he hits that trigger, it's going to fire. That is definitely a training situation, and that's why what we said earlier in the video about specialists applies.
Yeah. So I think what we need to do is run this in some more realistic scenario, not just dumping some rounds on the range.
No, I agree. This needs to be put through a two-gun match with a properly appropriate period-correct sidearm, and we should see how we do against other semi-automatic rifles. And I know we're not going to beat them, but how well do we compare? Because we know how we compare with single shots, and it's not great. But I have a feeling...
I have a feeling this is better than a bolt action.
I do. I think so. It's faster.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that's quintessentially American, is that toggle link lever action rifle, whether it's the 60, the 66, the 73, or the 76, is an amazing sight to behold, and it's a fast gun. It's a fast gun. When they went away from the 76 and started changing things in later versions, what that Browning started doing versus the Henry action, the gun's handling changed a lot. The speed is lost. The rapidity of action is lost. They might be stronger.
You're a little bit of a connoisseur of this. For most people, the speed of a 92 and the speed of a 73 are going to be nay indistinguishable.
I don't agree.
Well, how many years have you been in cowboy action shooting?
I shot it a long time.
The average person has not shot cowboy action at all, much
That's
less
fair.
10 years at a seriously competitive level. So, and Browning's redesigns made the gun stronger for smokeless powder and et cetera.
You're going to shoot 30-30, or you're going to shoot 7.62 by 54R. You are not doing it in an upscale toggle link. You're doing it something that has an actual locking system.
Yeah.
So that's understandable. But from our perspective, and from my perspective at least, The 4560 is certainly no slouch, and it
Yeah.
brought to the battlefield something that was missing in terms of a semi-intermediate cartridge, and having that repeating action would have changed a lot of things.
Really fascinating to think about. Had they adopted this, would it have been successful enough that maybe it would have delayed adoption of a bolt-action rifle? You want to get really crazy? Do we have doughboys jumping into trenches with lever-action Winchesters
It's a question
in
asked,
World War I?
why not? Seriously.
Would it actually, honestly, this versus an 03 Springfield, if I'm going to be in some sort of close combat, 12 rounds, less recoil instead of 5 rounds with more recoil?
Faster to cycle, too.
Yeah,
And probably more mud resistant, but that's another discussion.
yeah. We'll have to figure that one out.
Yeah, that's another conversation. So I think it's a really interesting conversation, and stay tuned for some us doing this in a practical environment.
Yeah.
But at that point, I think this is the kind of it's not the conclusion. We have more to do in the lever gun series. We've got a DMR to talk about, some other stuff, and you're going to see more lever gun series stuff. But this is the gun that we standardized on in terms of what would have been the best choice for that specialist group.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you for tuning in to another episode of InRange. You paid for not only the gun, actually, because we did buy this of our own finances, but all of the time, labor, and effort to make the ammunition to be able to shoot it.
You know, this is a reproduction,
Yeah.
so that we can bang it around and not have to worry about it. There are original 1876s out there in 4560.
There are.
If you want one, they're actually not necessarily that much more expensive than the reproductions.
Although the reproductions are clearly beautiful as well. This one happens to be by Uberti, so
Yep.
so everyone knows. So if you're already a Patreon supporter, please thank you. You're the ones that funded the ammo and the gun,
Yeah.
and the lever gun project in general. And if you're not, please consider it. And if you can't do either of those, what we would like, if you could, is make sure you subscribe to one of our channels. You can find them all on InRange.tv and share with your friends.